Hi, everybody. Welcome to a very special episode of Blaze Baking with Rach. I was just talking to our guest, Lauren Coe of Loco Kitchen. Hi, Lauren.
Hello.
Offline, we were saying how we're at the end of March right now, which March is pie month. So Lauren's been very busy with a lot of pie making this month. I'm going to introduce Lauren to those of you who don't know. To those of you who don't know her, I'll read her bio. And then we're going to get baking her Spoke Signals pie, which I'm so excited to bake. So let me just read you Lauren's bio quick. I'm going to put my glasses on for that. So Lauren Coe is an artist, self-taught home baker, founder of the popular Instagram account Loco Kitchen, and author of the New York Times best-selling cookbook PIEOMETRY, which I just have been loving. You can see I have like every page marked. Her colorful geometric style made all hell break loose on the frontier of contemporary pie art, and her iconic signature spoke design, which we're going to do today, has been dubbed the modern lattice. Love that. Her work has been widely featured in publications such as Vogue, O Magazine, BuzzFeed's Tasty, and on screen in Martha Bakes and CBS Sunday This Morning, and now on screen here on Blaze Baking with Rach. Lauren has roots in sunny San Diego, but is currently based in Seattle, Washington with her partner Ben and their bear dog, Santi. Did I say that right, Santi?
Santi.
Yeah. Santi. Okay. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm excited to bake together today.
So excited to have you here. I know so many of our Blaze viewers turned in because they've been completely fangirling you with your Instagram at Loco Kitchen. And if you guys are not checking out Loco Kitchen, you have to. I mean, this is an example from the book. You can see these are actual like hand-drawn pictures, which it kind of does look like art, your pies, right?
Thanks. Yeah, I like to consider myself first an artist and then a baker. It just so happens that my medium is edible. So I'm particularly in it for the design, but we are here to make sure that things still taste good. So it's kind of like a full package.
Well, before we get into the pie crust, can you tell us kind of how you got your start as a designer / baker, and how Loco Kitchen got started and then took off, and PIEOMETRY and all that stuff? Very cool story.
Honestly, it was kind of an accident. So I moved to Seattle in 2016, and actually my professional background is in social work and nonprofit administration. So at the time I was looking for a job in those fields and was fun employed, as they say, and just kind of blooping around on the internet with all this extra time on my hands. And I happened to stumble across some really beautiful pictures of pie on Pinterest. And I thought, I've been cooking and baking my whole life, but in my Chinese, Honduran American family, not a lot of traditional apple pie happening. So somehow made it to adulthood without ever having made a pie. So I thought, I wonder if I could do it. Just kind of went for it. I think I picked a random recipe off online and made a simple plaid lattice apple pie, and it was fine. Didn't change my life. I didn't immediately transform into a pie lady. It was simply something I just kind of added to my repertoire of things I would make for fun. And then fast forward a year later to August of 2017, I just felt like I was becoming that friend and putting too many food photos in my personal Instagram account. And I thought,
I'm that friend, by the way.
I mean, no shame. I just felt like I needed a separate space to kind of hold all these things that I was really documenting for myself. And, you know, I had no intentions of this account being anything like public or, you know, much less a professional venture. It was just going to be a personal photo album of things like summer salads and blueberry muffins and chocolate chip cookies. But it just so happened that the first photo I uploaded was a geometric pie, which, you know, those initial pies that I saw a year ago, they were very beautiful, but kind of rustic and floral, lots of leaves. Really pretty, but not really my style. And so I think I just kind of gravitate towards modern design, clean lines, and also as a pie novice, I thought it would be much easier to kind of execute some of these designs that are just cutting dough into strips and shapes. And, you know, when I started kind of sharing these photos, I thought, I don't see anybody else kind of doing a modern design take on pie. So I thought this was something that I wanted to explore. So back to starting this Loco Kitchen Instagram account, I shared that first geometric pie photo, and it got something like several hundred likes, which as a regular person totally blew my mind. I just thought, like, these have to be bots or like trolls or something. So I waited a few days and then shared another photo, I think, of a tart. And again, several hundred likes. And so in a month, I had gained 1,000 followers. And 2 months in, Design Milk reshared one of my pie photos. And at the time, I hadn't even heard of them. I, you know, really wasn't super into social media. But I just remember waking up and looking at my partner and being like, oh, some account reshared my photo. I don't know who they are, but they have 1 million followers. And then we proceeded to watch my phone completely blow up. I gained like 8,000 followers in a matter of hours. And by that December, I hit 100,000 followers and just had gone completely viral. And, you know, 5 months in, I quit my full-time job. And a few years later, I'm still doing this full time. I have a book and I get to do amazing things like this, wake up on a Saturday morning or afternoon and get to bake with people all over the country.
That's amazing. I love that. That is a true social media story. I mean, only in this day and age on Instagram could that happen. And I love it.
So wild.
So it's so good. Well, thanks for sharing that with us. I think we should get started on our pie crust. Okay. So for the spoke signals pie, which you guys, this is where we're going to end up with. I hope, if I can do it. I practiced. So we're going to, we've prepared some stuff in advance, and there's some great tips in your book, which we'll talk about making the pie crust. For the spoke signals pie, you make 2 discs. So you double the recipe for your regular pie crust. We're going to talk about the second disc in a little bit, which we worked on earlier. But for the first disc, this is going to be like your pie shell, right?
Yes. This will be the bottom crust. And just a quick note, we have prepped the top crust, but normally when I set out to make this design, I work on the top crust first. That way it can sit and chill in the fridge, which it is doing now for us. So rather than rolling out the bottom crust first, as we're doing now, I work on the top one so it can chill, because as we know, the golden rule of pie making is to keep everything cold.
Yes, keep the, and going back to, we've already done the crust, but everyone can see this in the book. The butter needs to be fresh from the fridge, nice and cold. Water needs to be iced. Everything is cold. So, and I can see how quickly things heat up when you use it. So Lauren and I are just rolling out our base right now, and you can see we're both working on floured surfaces.
Yes. I like to just roll directly on my work surface. At home, I have a stone countertop. And I just kind of lightly dust the surface with flour and also flour my rolling pin. And as you can see, I'm kind of rotating my dough as I go around, because we're trying to roll this into as close to a circular shape as possible. It's not the end of the world.
I had to stand up to give it a little muscle here.
Yeah. So I'm kind of moving my dough around, making sure that it's not stuck to the work surface. It's a great tragedy when you work so hard to roll out a beautiful sheet of dough and then to find it stuck to your work surface. So
I know.
Make sure to check on that along the way to save us a little bit of heartache later.
I was saying earlier to you before we got online that I rolled out the other dough earlier today for the top part. And I really find the process of rolling out the pie dough a bit meditative.
Definitely. And I think that's kind of how I got into pie making and using it as an art medium, and particularly with these kind of precise geometric inspired designs, is that I had eventually gotten an office job. I wasn't super thrilled with it. It was like, you know, I had the skill set for it, but I wasn't feeling super fulfilled. And so on weeknights when I'd come home, or weekends, I would make these intricate pies in my kitchen, and just kind of working on those was what was really therapeutic and kind of soothing to me in a way that, you know, my day job wasn't.
That is so cool. And then you had your sort of, I don't know if I want to say hobby or passion or dream job. It became your job, right?
I guess so, yeah. All right,
so
I rolled out my dough, and I just kind of rolled it onto my rolling pin instead of picking it up, because we don't want that dough to stretch out. So
Okay, I'm almost there. I wanted to ask you too, how thin and how big do you want this crust to be?
I usually, here, let me just unfurl this back on my work surface. So if you have your pie tin handy, I usually just flip it over and make sure it's a little bit larger than your pie tin to make sure that it will...
I have a tiny bit more to go, but viewers, watch Lauren, do not watch me.
All right.
Trust me, I've made a lot of pies on this show. So
gently roll this dough onto my rolling pin, and then I'm just going to unfurl it right over the top of my dough. And this kind of protects how nice and smooth it is. We don't want to stretch it since that will contribute to the dough shrinking when we bake it.
And you don't have to prepare the pie, the pie pan at all. There's nothing to do to it before you put this in.
I don't do that.
Okay, and you're putting it over the edge right now.
Yeah, so then I'm just taking the edges and kind of nestling the dough into the inner elbows. Instead of pressing in the pie plate, I'm taking the edges and kind of gently pushing them into the edges.
Okay, sorry, I'm a little bit behind. I'm gonna
No, you're fine. I have made this so many times, so it's almost autopilot. So
yeah, it is amazing how quickly it all comes together.
Yes, and I have lots of recipes in my book for pie dough. I prefer to work with all butter over, shortening or lard. I just personally prefer the taste of all butter crust. I think it kind of simplifies the process to use fewer ingredients. It's less that you have to buy. It's less that you have to add. And I also find that butter holds up a little bit better than shortening and lard. It doesn't melt as fast. So some of these designs require a little bit more time, and so butter gives me a little more wiggle room.
The recipe for this dough is really quite simple. I mean, it's like butter, flour, I think it was salt, sugar, ice water. It was like everything you probably have in your pantry, right?
Exactly, and in pretty decent quantities. So for the edges of this bottom shell, you can make your design, one of your design choices now. If you want a super clean, modern edge that you're going to trim off at the end, you can trim a smaller edge right now and then tuck it under, or you can leave it like this, and then we can roll a crimped edge later. So either way.
All right, mine is just kind of going around. Again, not the expert, just the interviewer here, but I did.
No, that's a great option. So we'll have you do the trimmed edge and I'll do the rolled edge with the crimp, so that we see both techniques.
Okay, great. Well, that seems so easy, and it really is. It really is. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've already rolled out our crust.
Right.
And then now we'll move on to the filling.
Perfect. Yep. So this filling, when we were emailing back and forth before, in the book, it actually calls for blueberries and rhubarb. I didn't find rhubarb right now that looked that great. So you said, don't worry about it. So I did blueberries and strawberries. What did you do?
Yeah, I managed to find rhubarb. It's severely off season. So I don't normally buy off season produce, but for the sake of the visual, it's here. I think it'll work just fine, but also strawberries, or I also mentioned if you just do fully blueberries, that works too.
Okay, and it's 3 cups of each.
Yes, more or less.
And we did take a 1/4 cup out of the blueberries for.
Yes, we want to reserve some for the very end, our kind of extra design element.
Okay, so we're going to add to the filling a cup of sugar, right?
Sugar and tapioca starch, which is the thickening agent of my choice. I like it. I prefer it over cornstarch because when it gels the fruit juices, it's clear versus cloudy. It's just a kind of personal choice.
Okay, so for people baking at home, and I know we posted the recipe earlier, but it's a cup of sugar, 1/3 cup of the tapioca starch, and then we do, I think it's a teaspoon of salt and 1/2 tablespoon of lime juice, right?
Yes, so just kind of squeeze a wedge of lime in there, or you can do without that.
Lime juice. It's really, pretty simple list of ingredients, nothing crazy.
Yeah, definitely, and it can be pretty flexible. So I see that you're using one of the bigger ceramic pie plates, which can be a little bit deeper. For me, because I can only eat so many pies, I make a lot of my pies in the disposable tins now. So I've started giving them all away to friends, family, and neighbors. So you just kind of estimate the volume of your filling based on the size of your tin. Kind of adjust.
I mean, you can only eat so many pies. I told you before, we were invited over to friends' houses tonight. So I said, I'm bringing the pie.
That's
So,
perfect.
yeah,
And that's one of the ironies of this journey for me is that I actually don't really have a sweet tooth, so I don't eat that many pies to begin with. And now that I'm producing so many, it's even less.
You have to give them away. But in your book, it's pretty much half pies and half tarts, right?
Yeah.
And there are some savory things too, right?
Yeah. And those ones are the ones that we tend to keep for ourselves when we make them. Okay. And then just a note about the filling, this order is very intentional. So I like to focus on the design aspect. So I try to keep the fillings as simple as possible. So I don't like to make the filling too far in advance. Otherwise the fruit starts to macerate. You get a lot of juices. I think if you prefer to avoid that like blurpage when you're baking, which I personally love, I think it's kind of fun and delicious. You can always cook your filling ahead of time and just make sure it's cooled off. That way it's thickened. You don't have to worry about like extra juicing, especially when you're buying, fruit in season and it can be extra juicy. But we're going to make this filling right before we put it in the pie plate, and then we're going to execute the design so it doesn't sit too long.
Also, right before we fill it, I should note too, you can use frozen fruit. I mean, this is fresh, but you can do frozen blueberries, frozen berries, whatever. You just have to allow for more cooking time if they are from frozen, right?
Yes. And again, I don't thaw my frozen fruit. I just kind of mix it, toss it in, and then freeze the pie or bake it right away. So if you're worried about the juice, then you can let it thaw and like macerate. But I kind of skip that step because one only has so many hours in a day.
I know. So we're going to fill the pie?
Yes. So we're going to pour that right into our prepared bottom crust here.
I dropped something here. Are we going to first do the circle ring or do we do that afterwards? First we fill.
Do that after the filling is in.
Okay.
Yes.
See, I studied. I read the book.
Yeah. So again, my pie tin is a little smaller than the recommended in the book, or a standard reusable tin. So I'm probably just not going to use all the filling in here.
Okay.
But again, fruit like this, it's going to shrink down a little bit when you bake it. So it's fine if it's, not super level.
This looks so good.
Dome it up a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Oh my gosh, the colors, it looks delicious.
See, mine's stacked a little bit to allow.
Yeah, mine is a little bit bigger. Yeah. Hang on one sec. I gotta just check. Here we go. I'm getting our comments up here. So by the way, I know we have some questions from the audience. So may this be a good time to get a question or two in before we get to the next step. Sorry, I know people at home are watching, and normally we do our questions at the end, but good to have them. So the question is, what kind of pie roller are you using, Lauren?
This pie roller or a rolling pin?
The rolling pin, I think.
Oh, yes. I happen to have this tapered one that I prefer because it's the only one I had for a long time and I've just become accustomed to it. So I talk a little bit about equipment and tools in the book where I encourage people to make what you have work for you. So if you have a different rolling pin, as long as you're comfortable with using it, then that's the one that's going to make the best pie for you.
I have this old rolling pin. It must be 25 years old and it works. So
yeah, exactly. And it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't need to be expensive. When I first moved to my apartment in Seattle and made that first pie, I didn't have a ruler. I didn't have, I didn't even know what this kind of pie rolling cutter was. So I just used a cookie sheet and a sharp knife to cut these dough strips. So I used a sharp
knife this morning to use the dough strips. I told you,
exactly.
PIEOMETRY, my daughter's in geometry. I took her straight edge. There is math involved.
Sometimes. I mean, also for anybody who's intimidated, I was always terrible at math. So there's also a minimal amount of math. It's just kind of inspired by math concepts and aesthetics, but you don't necessarily have to do
terrible at math, and then you wrote a book called PIEOMETRY. That's
I know. It's again one of those like big ironies of you never know where life will take you and where you'll end up kind of things.
Well, we're a lot of creatives on A Mighty Blaze, so we're more of the writers, the English majors, but there is some math involved in baking, but I always say it's fun math.
Yes, exactly. I think it's like visual math.
Visual math. Nothing. We're not doing calculus or anything. We're not
doing no. I wouldn't be here if that was involved.
That's not for us. Okay, so what's next?
Okay, so we have prepped our top crust. So we rolled it out into a rectangle and we cut it into strips. And, you know, in the book, I say 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch. And to be honest, I never measure. I just kind of eyeball because I only have so much.
I was measuring.
Right.
Yeah.
So as long as you're using I mean, really, I use my ruler as a straight edge more so than to measure. So just kind of cutting it all into strips. And then we've kept it in the fridge to keep it nice and cold. So now that we're ready to execute our design, we can take our dough out and then pull off this spoke design.
Yeah, Lauren and I did some work this morning. Like I said, the base is one disc. The other disc, what we did was we rolled it out to like an 11 by 15 sheet and cut it in about 30 strips. And we put it back in the fridge, like Lauren said, because you have to keep your dough cold. So I'm going to take mine out. Lauren's taking hers out.
Yes. So one of my big tips on constructing top crust is that I roll out the dough and then I place it onto a sheet of parchment before I cut it, before I go any further. That way, if it's summer, if your house is really warm, or you have an emergency, you have to go do something else really quick, you can just slide a baking sheet right under that parchment and pop it in the fridge to cool this dough down, to keep it cold, that kind of thing. It makes it super easy to transfer. And then again, you don't have to worry about all these strips sticking to your work surface, melting everywhere. This can be really handy. So dough on the parchment and then on a baking sheet in the fridge.
So
we kind of cut
we're going to get to I have the same thing. We're going to get to the design part here, which is kind of what we're all here for. So I feel like we need to do that in a bit of a timely fashion, just so that the dough doesn't get too warm, right?
Yeah.
And after that, we can definitely talk more and do some tips and questions and all that good stuff. And one of the tips you said in your book too, which I thought was really great about keeping this dough nice and cold, is when you're handling it, because we're going to have to handle it, to really just hold it on the edge, on the outside tip, so you don't get the whole strip warm, because that will happen with your hands.
Totally. And this design, like most of mine, looks more complicated than it is to execute. So shortly we will see that it's actually pretty simple. This is the modern lattice. I actually think it's a lot simpler than the traditional lattice because there's no weaving involved. The handling is very minimal, and I think the brain kind of puzzle is simpler than one might expect.
How cool is it that you became the modern lattice?
So wild.
It's crazy.
It's still crazy to me.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, so the first step is we have this round cutter, or a small bowl or a tiny cup, whatever is kind of round, and we'll use as a reference, and we'll place that right in the center of our filling and just kind of gently rest it on top of the filling in the middle. Or if you want to get creative,
pushing it down to the bottom.
No. You're just gently, this is just kind of like a stencil.
Got it.
And we want to be able to remove it easily afterwards. So it's just gently resting on the surface. I think we can see. And then we're going to take our first dough strip, and again, just kind of handling it by the ends gently. If your dough is kind of pulling and stretching, it's probably too warm and you want to stick it back in the fridge. But we're just going to lay that straight across the surface. The center of the strip should graze this round cutter.
Okay.
And then we'll just gently press these ends into the bottom crust to make sure it adheres. And maybe you're surprised, but that's the full technique of this design. So we'll take our next strip of dough and do the exact same. I know that this design can kind of look like a visual optical illusion where it looks like the strips are curving around this circle cutter. You want to keep the dough straight. So we're laying the second strip of dough. So the end in your left hand is to the left of the first strip, and the end in your right hand is to the right, which sounds kind of complicated, but
you just have to know your left and right.
It's separated by about a 1/2 inch, right? And again, the center of the strip is grazing that ring cutter.
How am I doing?
Yes.
Yes. It really is an optical illusion because it does look like it's spun around.
It looks like this spiral vortex, but it's really just, straight lines going all the way around the center cutter. So that's pretty much it. We're going to keep going all the way around the pie, laying these straight strips. The center is touching the center circle. And we're going to go around twice, ideally, or, however many strips you have.
And you said about, I know we're eyeballing, but about a 1/2 inch distance between each strip. Okay.
You can do it a little closer. You could do it farther. Again, it's kind of however you feel like doing it. It's your pie. It's your process.
Again, this is sort of meditative as well, I find.
Yeah, exactly.
So fun.
And then if it starts to get a little unwieldy, you can kind of rotate your pie. And again, if you start to get confused, just remember that you're working in the same direction the whole way around.
Right. So I'm sort of going clockwise, I guess. That's kind of the natural tendency.
Yeah, exactly.
You just have to make sure you're always grazing the side of the cutter in the middle. Ooh,
I know. And then there's sometimes people have questions about the concerns of this middle part of the dough cooking, but they shouldn't all be stacked on the same point. So there are some layers there, but it still should bake because it is staggered.
Okay. Yeah, I just got a little mixed up for a second, but now I'm good.
Yeah, so just remember what direction you're moving and then just keep going that way. And then you can always turn your pie if it gets a little twisty.
Right.
And then if you're
not my strongest subject either.
We're all, you know, in the same club here. And then if your dough feels a little dry or floury, you can always brush a little bit of water around the edge to make sure the strips stay. But
okay.
I think it's a little bit warm where I am, so we don't need the water today.
Yeah, okay. Mine is coming together. And you said you're going to do this until you've basically covered the entire area of the pie twice. Is that right?
Yeah, so you can see, let me see if I can hold this up. There's a double layer of strips there versus the single layer. So you want to basically have a double layer all the way around. Or, you know, if you're short some strips, that's fine. If you have extras, that's totally fine.
Yeah, one of my strips broke.
That's totally fine. Not the end of the world.
Right. It was fun to cut the strips too.
Yeah, it's again one of those kind of meditative things that you can zone out.
And you're folding them underneath, because I can see at the end we're gonna cut those when we cut the remaining crust at the bottom, right?
Yeah. So mine are just kind of dangling. I'm not doing anything to them yet because I'm going to roll them and trim, but we'll get there.
I'm moving a little bit slower than you. I hope that's okay.
Oh, that's totally fine. I've made this design probably hundreds of times, if not thousands now, so I could probably do this nicely.
Probably could. Yeah. So I should say also with the crust that I made it by hand. But in your book, you also have directions for how to make it with a food processor, right?
Yeah, so I have both the hand method and the food processor. I think if you have a food processor, it can be a good way to save some time. I generally prefer to make it by hand because I like having that control over the texture of the butter and the pieces that show up in the dough. But, you know, if I'm preparing for a workshop and I have to make, you know, 40 discs of dough, I'm probably going to do it in the food processor. So both are totally valid. I think it just depends on what you want out of it, but both are perfectly fine.
I do too, and it's also less equipment. Like you were saying before, you don't really need a ton of fancy equipment to do this.
Exactly. So the hand method, it's a mixing bowl, a spatula, your hands, and then, you know, some water on the side. So.
Yes.
Okay, while we wait for you to finish your design, I am just pressing these strips into the bottom crust all the way around.
Okay.
And then I'm going to trim around, but leaving about a 1 inch overhang, just so it's even, but we still have some extra dough to work with.
All right, I'm done too. To be honest, there were 3 little scraggly pieces left that I'm not working with.
Oh yeah, so we can talk about dough scraps too. I had 3 scraggly pieces. You can either gently press them together and then save it. If you make a bunch of pies, you have some dough scraps, you can press them all together and re-roll it one more time. Or you can simply bake them off on a sheet and have pie fries. Put a little extra sugar or Parmesan cheese and have a little bonus snack while you wait for your pie to chill or bake.
So fun. Wait, Lauren, on the edges, should I have put some like water or anything like that to get it to stick or no?
If you feel like the strips are kind of moving around and not adhering to the bottom, you can always brush with water before you start.
No, mine are okay, but I thought I read something about that. So it's okay.
Yeah, so sometimes if your dough is a little floury underneath or things are a little dry, that can be helpful. But, you know, my place right now where I am is a little bit warm, so the dough is a little bit stickier, so it's staying perfectly well. So I just use some kitchen shears to kind of trim all the way around. It's a little bit imperfect, and that's, you know, fine. It doesn't have to be super nice.
I'm doing the same thing.
And then I have some dough scraps that I'll probably wrap up in plastic and use one more time later.
That's a good idea. I saw in your book and on your Instagram too, you have a lot of pie crusts that have really cool colors in them. How do you do that?
Yeah, so I tried to, I guess, challenge myself initially to only use natural ingredients. So I only dye my doughs with fruit powders, vegetable powders, fruit juices, kind of produce products. And so, you know, I have multiple recipes in my book, but basically I substitute fresh juice for the water in the dough. And then for extra kind of color insurance, I also add powder to the dry flour, sugar, salt mix. And so, you know, things like beet juice and beet powder bring a really vibrant and rich magenta color. Blueberry powder and blueberry juice give a really deep purple. You have things like spinach. If you put it through a juicer, use that green juice and also have some spinach powder. That will bring a really great green. And then you can kind of play with, you know, the vibrancy and the darkness of your pie. There is a slight risk when you work with these naturally colored ingredients is that when you bake the pie, the color does tend to fade a little bit. That's just the nature of, you know, pie baking and kind of coloring with natural products. So that's just something that you keep in mind. Again, I'm in it for the art and the design of it. I think we can appreciate both the before and after in different ways. It's kind of appreciating different steps along the journey. But yeah, I think it's very simple to kind of add some of these natural ingredients to bring really vibrant color palettes that you can either weave together or create a monochromatic design. And then for sourcing, a lot of these fruit powders I just find online or, you know, even Trader Joe's. Yeah, Trader Joe's sells a lot of freeze-dried fruits right now, and then you can just blitz those up in a spice grinder or put them in a Ziploc and, you know, bash them with your rolling pin until they're
Trader Joe's. Yeah.
Yeah, so very accessible and easy to get. Some colors, you know, things like blue spirulina that I call for can be a little pricier. You can add them in smaller amounts, or, you know, you can always go with a classic regular pie dough, and that can be really beautiful too.
I can see myself completely experimenting with this. This is going to be our new thing.
Yeah, it's super fun.
It's so fun. Okay, so what do we do next for this center part, which is sort of like the end?
Before we do that, we'll just take
care of it. I don't mean to rush you. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So for your design, we're going to keep it modern, keep it clean, and then you're just going to run a paring knife all the way around and trim off any of the excess dough, just making sure that all the dough is pressed in.
And what are you going to do for your design?
For me, I'm going to do that traditional crimped edge, which can be a good option for, you know, really juicy pies like this, just serve as an extra barrier. So the first step to crimping is I'm just going to roll all this extra overhang in. So let me see if I can try to do this where we can see. So I'm just rolling it in, and it's okay if it's kind of imperfect and lumpy. I'm just kind of tucking it all in so that it sits on the edge, the lip of that pie tin. If you have any overhang, you run into the risk of the crust just kind of melting off the pie plate when you bake it. So
got it. Well, I didn't need a modern look, but I'm glad I did.
Yeah, it really depends on what you're looking for. I think that particular edge can work really well with like apple pies because there's less risk of juice. But again, the blurpage, as I like to say, with the juices coming out, I think that can be part of the, you know, the end product of the art of it. Sometimes art can be really precise and, you know, perfect, and then sometimes it's a little more abstract with color and splotches. All right, so I've kind of tucked this in. It looks a little bit like a empanada edge. And then I'm going to do the crimped edge. So because my dough is a little bit warm, it's a little bit sticky.
I know, the dough is getting warm. It happens very quickly.
Yeah, and if you're concerned, you can always pop it in the fridge for, you know, a couple minutes and pull it back out, let it cool off for a second. But I have this, you know, pile of flour that I use when I rolled out my dough. I'm just going to kind of dip my fingers in there so that they don't stick. And then to crimp, where's the camera? I have pointer and thumb and then a pointer finger. I'm just going to use that on the dough, kind of like that. And you create this little point. And I'm just going to do that all the way around.
Okay. Again, by accident, I guess, I just have your modern design.
Yeah. And this is great because then we get to see both. So, you know, if you're intimidated by crimping, honestly, it took me a while to master crimping. So just trimming all the excess off the edge is a great way to finish your pie.
Yeah.
All right,
Make it Oh, thanks. I'm getting some feedback from the team that I'm doing okay.
Yours looks beautiful.
I bake a ton and I'm not afraid to bake anything, but my design skills, I'm learning a lot. We did some fancy cupcake design. So now we're doing fancy pie design. We're getting there for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, I hope that it felt accessible, right? You're laying strips down.
Really
so now I have my crimped edge all the way around. It's just takes 3 fingers. And then we won't forget about this circle cutter. We're just going to gently remove it.
Okay.
And you can either keep your pie like this, or, you know, if we're working with blueberries, those reserved blueberries, I like to pop a few more in the middle, just purely for aesthetics.
Right. Yeah, we reserved. Your instructions are great.
It's just for fun.
Right. Your book, for those of, and I know we're linking to your book in Bookshop, but your book is great because it's obviously a cookbook, but it's also a really fun read. And your story is in the book, and there's a ton of baking puns, which I love. All hell is baking loose right now. You're the life of the party. I mean, we could go on and on. So it's a really fun read. It's like I found myself reading it in the kitchen because I was, you know, following the directions, but then I found myself taking it into my office to really read it and like learn about your story. So very well done. And the pictures are just beautiful. So
thank you. Yeah, I tried to make it fun in a lot of different aspects, both in the cooking and the baking and the voice. You know, there's a lot of cookbooks on the market, and some of them are really great and some of them are a little bit boring, but they serve a different purpose. So hopefully this one feels kind of fun to read as a book. We like to say that I, you know, wrote this for professional bakers, novice bakers, armchair bakers. So if you just want to look at photos and read stories, hopefully this will still serve its purpose for you. But also,
can I read you what you wrote in the beginning of the book? Because what you were saying, who you wrote it for, I thought this was so cool. To all the other regular nobodies out there minding their own business, dreaming dreams they don't even know they have. You never know where life will take you and what magic awaits you. This is for you. I love that because there's so much in there. It's just really inspiring. So yeah.
Really never know where life will take you sometimes.
Right. It's almost like you said you're an artist and a designer. It's almost like a coffee table book. Maybe I'll leave it out on my coffee table.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Okay. Next step. We have the filled in part with blueberries or whatever blueberries. Are we going to do an egg wash here, do you think?
If you want. So again, the golden rule to pie making is to keep everything cold. So usually once my pie is constructed and fully ready, I like to chill it in the fridge for 10-15 minutes to make sure that dough is extra cold, and that way you ensure that your design is preserved when you bake it. You work so hard on it, you want it to still look beautiful instead of just kind of melting all together. And then also another thing I do, because I can't always like bake them off fast enough or give them away fast enough, is that I tend to freeze my pies solid at this stage. So I freeze it until this is set, and then I'll wrap it up in plastic or foil. And then when I need to bake it, I'll pull it out straight from the freezer, do a quick egg wash if I want, and then stick it straight into the hot oven, fully frozen, so no thawing. And that way, you know, sometimes pie making can be a long process, and you can easily make a pie ahead of time. And then when you need to serve a pie or bring a pie somewhere, you can quickly pull one out, bake it, and you have a pie ready.
Okay, these are excellent tips. So, because sometimes when I'm baking, I'm feeling like rushed. I got to get in the oven. I got to do this. I got to do that. So we're going to put ours in the fridge now, and I'm not going to preheat my oven until later because we have to preheat it to 450. We got to get it. We got to take it from the really cold to the really hot. But after it's properly chilled, then you can do an egg wash if you want.
Yeah, and I like to do a whole egg with a splash of cream. I think that gives a really like rounded golden color. You could also just do egg. You could do egg yolk for more yellow. A note that when I do make my colored dough crust, I don't egg wash because we don't want golden brown. We want to preserve that color as much as possible. So I pretty much only egg wash.
Put our pies back in the fridge.
Yeah. Okay. Fridge or freezer.
Don't look at how messy my fridge is.
No judgment. Safe space.
Yes. Okay.
And then another baking tip is that I always bake my pies on a rimmed baking sheet because you never know if it's going to be juicy or, you know, the butter is going to melt off. So much easier to clean a baking sheet with parchment or foil than it is to scrub the bottom of your oven.
I have that ready to go. And trust me, I have practically ruined ovens. So that is a very fun to clean the oven. That's a very good tip. Yeah.
Yes.
So for those of you, you know, who are watching at home, I know we went through a lot of things, but if you go in Lauren's book, the design is very cool. This video is going to go up on YouTube on A Mighty Blade, so you can come back and refer to it and listen to Lauren's tips. Do we have any audience questions? I know there were some that came out in the middle, and we were so busy designing, we didn't really have time to answer. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to pop them up. Or if not, I'll ask Lauren some more questions because I have about a million. Yeah. So as far as the designs, I'm just kind of curious because this is your modern lattice, your spoke signals pie, but how do you come up with all the other designs in the book? Like, do you draw them out first, like artwork? Do they come to you in the middle of the night? Like, how'd you come up with the designs, particularly to fill up a whole book and then going forward for other recipes?
Yeah, good question. I'm basically inspired by anything and everything, largely things that are food unrelated. So I have pies and tarts in my book and in my feed that are inspired by things like patio furniture, wicker purses, bathroom tiles, storm drains. So I'm kind of constantly looking at the world around me and kind of figuring out how I can translate a lot of these designs or textiles or patterns into something that I can shape with dough or fruit. I'm also largely informed and inspired by what's in season. So again, making what I have work for me. So that's, you know, whatever's on sale at the grocery store, what's in season, what I have in my kitchen. So maybe I have a ton of apples that are getting a little wrinkly, or I just happen to have a bunch of mangoes. So I'm kind of looking at what I have on hand or what's around me and then kind of using that to make something work. I rarely sketch things out ahead of time. I find that I am more fulfilled by the baking process when I have kind of a general direction that I'm heading in, and then I just let the creative session take me wherever I go, because, you know, dough and fruit don't always cooperate the same way that pencil and pen do. And then I do have those sketches in the end pages of my book, and that was kind of my reward. Once I finished and finalized a recipe and design, I got to sketch it out, and that was really to help me have a macro visualization of all the things that I had in my book, make sure there was like a balance of designs and colors and flavors.
I just have to show you guys some of these pictures. Like, this is the spoke signals in colors. I mean, it's really so fun to look at. I think that's so interesting how you find inspiration in everyday things. You could probably look at, you know, a table or a book or a chair or something and see something. It's like everywhere you go, you're seeing pie shapes.
Totally. I'm always taking photos, often like close-ups or just kind of like cropped images of, you know, weaving or the way that like foliage is kind of hanging out together, or even sometimes like the way shadows hit something. And also inspired by, you know, math puzzles and other crazy things like that. So,
cool. Yeah. We have a question here from an audience, from a viewer. Lauren, who are your favorite baking influences, creatives on social media? Great question.
Good question.
Who are you stalking on Instagram? That's what we want to
know. So Christina Cho, I think her Instagram is Eat Cho Food, CHO Food. She just came out with a book called Mooncakes and Milk Bread. So obviously I bake a lot of pies, but I'm kind of a novice when it comes to bread. And I have been super obsessed with her cookbook and all these like milk bread and buns that are very nostalgic to my kind of Chinese upbringing. I really love what she does. And it's, again, also very simple and accessible. Back in the day when I kind of was stumbling around on Pinterest, I had discovered Jojo Romancer, who I believe is not really active on social media, and Julie Jones. They were the kind of original pioneers making really beautiful floral artistic pies. And I've been lucky enough to kind of become friends with them since then. They make really beautiful things, totally different style, but really, really good at their craft as well. And am I drawing a blank?
No, that's cool. I think it's cool how you become friends with the people that you used to fan. That must be really
I think that's been really pleasant, and I'm very grateful for kind of these opportunities. I feel like I'm pretty shy and introverted, and it would never occur to me to kind of reach out to strangers on the internet. And, people have done that for me, and I've been able to build some really wonderful friendships that way. So it's been really fun. Oh, one more person. If you like what I do, Linda from Salty Seattle basically does what I do, but with pasta. So she uses natural ingredients and makes really beautiful pasta shapes and color combinations and things like that, but with pasta. So she's really fun to follow as well.
That's so cool. We could have a whole dinner, pasta and pie.
Yeah, definitely.
That is very cool. Speaking of what you're saying about making friends on social media, I'm just curious because I know this book, when it came out, like, how have you managed? I know you're teaching online courses and you've done online events. Can you tell us about some of the cool events you've done online and anything you have coming up that you're working on that you want to tell us about? Because I know people would love to learn how to make more of your cool pie designs from you.
Yeah, so things have been a little bit slower over the pandemic, of course. I haven't done too many official classes online, but now that, we're starting to venture out into the world safely, last week was Pie Day, which has become the biggest day of the year for me. I got to do some back-to-back in-person workshops, and I'm hoping to schedule a bunch more for the rest of the year, which I usually announce on Instagram, and you can find a calendar on my website. But I've started teaching a couple different classes. So I do a complete pie workshop where we go through how to make pie dough. I demo the spoke signals and maybe a couple other designs, and then participants get some hands-on time to make pie. And then I do an easy as pie class that's a little bit accelerated. We talk about shortcuts, things that you can use to kind of cut time off or cut ingredients off with store-bought crust, no bake fillings, and then focus on, design and using, again, what you have in your pantry to create something really beautiful. And then I have a couple fun tart classes as well. So I don't have anything officially scheduled, but I'm in the process of booking out through the summer. So fingers crossed that things don't get crazy out in the world again in terms of public health, so that we can do that. But if you're interested in mostly local, then I'm based in Seattle and hopefully going to run a few more workshops this year.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, for those folks near Seattle, definitely check them out and check out Lauren's website and her beautiful Instagram, Loco Kitchen. I'm telling you, that is going to be the rest of your day. Just eat the pie and check out. And she has really cool videos on there. And there's a link where you could purchase PIEOMETRY. Before we go, well, first of all, I want to thank you for your time, Lauren, because this has been so wonderful. I want to tell people who are baking at home, after it's chilled, either in the fridge or the freezer, you're going to put your oven to 450 and put the pie in there. I think you said for 25 minutes, and then turn the heat down and keep rotating, right?
I think 425, but
425.
High heat to blast it, and that way you kind of preserve that really beautiful frozen crust or very chilled dough, and then you can lower it to make sure that everything bakes evenly, and you bake until the filling is bubbling through the center. So because we use that tapioca starch, we want to make sure that all of that is cooked through. So you're relying not only on the visual cue of the golden crust, but making sure that your filling is cooked as well.
Okay, that's great. I mean, I made this pie actually a couple weeks ago on Pie Day, which was my husband's birthday. So 3/14 is a good birthday. It's a good day to have a pie. And I know Lauren has been really all over the place this year doing all the cool, or this month rather, doing all the baking. I'm just grabbing some of my notes because I want to tell you guys about what we have coming up next on the baking show. We're having Leah Hyslop, who's coming in from England, actually. We have Seattle, we're going to have London. And she wrote this beautiful book called The Brownie Diaries, My Recipes for Happy Times, Heartbreak, and Everything in Between. So it's part memoir, part brownie. You're going to learn a lot about where the brownie came from. It's very interesting. And like Lauren, she's good with the puns. She's got a recipe for, I think it's called Gentlemen Prefer Blondies, and Netflix and Chili recipe for brownies, and Are You Lonesome Tonight brownies. So what could be bad about that? So tune in. We'll tell you all about it, but that's going to be April 30th, Saturday, April 30th at 2 p.m. And in the meantime, coming up this week on A Mighty Blaze, we have a ton of programming. On the podcast, we have Mikkel Jolette On Thoughtful Bro, we have Ryan North. Crime Time, this is all this week. Jess Montgomery. Authors Love Bookstores, we have Edwin Hill. Debut Spotlight, Ellen Apston. The Zeitgeist, we have Elaine Chow. And Friday Frontliner, we have Edwin Hill. So tons of programming coming up. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, Lauren, for your time, and get making those cool pies and cool pie designs. We'll be here for more tips, and check out Lauren for sure on Instagram. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks for having me, and thanks to everyone for joining.